Man City are expected to target at least one new fullback this summer, and two names have recently been linked with a move to the Etihad. The first of those is Flamengo's 21-year-old Wesley, with reports in from Sky in Italy claiming that City are pushing to sign the Brazilian before the Club World Cup, which begins in the middle of June. And reports in Brazil have also backed that up, saying that City, confirming their interest in the right back. And this interest seems to have surfaced since the arrival of new sporting director Hugo Viana as well. So what do you make of this potential transfer, Stephen? You may not know too much about Wesley, which I can understand if you don't, but do you think this is a player that maybe has sort of the right kind of profile? Can you understand why City would target a player such as Wesley as part of the squad rebuild in the summer?
Honestly, I'd never heard of him until a few days ago, and I think there definitely is any shame in that. He's a young fullback playing in Brazil. I've watched him since, as we all do, and I can only really gather what I've seen on YouTube compilations and sort of scouting reports online and so on. And I think the most interesting thing to talk about him, and we'll talk a little bit about him, what I can gain as a player. The most interesting thing is really why City are interested in him, and the type of transfer this will be. And I think we're going to talk about Nicolo Savona as well. He's another player linked. Both of a very similar age profile, both young fullbacks, both wouldn't be £70 million players, both are the Khusanov-style signing, and I think we'll see a lot of this from Hugo Viana. Of course, he comes from a club in Portugal, Sporting, where they couldn't spend 60, £70 million on a player, and he's been tasked with finding, younger talent who will come and gain value and move on because that's the model for these teams. And Gyökeres, the most obvious example. He's become like a 90 goal in 2 seasons player, which is absolutely absurd. Signed from Coventry, in the Championship. And it's that eye for sort of talent, which I think City are drawn to because I think it's a necessary move from City to go for a sporting director like that because you got these days a midfielder costs £100 million from the Premier League. You just can't do a squad rebuild at that level. You can't sign five players like that. You can't spend £500 million in one summer and not fail PSR and financial fair play or whatever because it's implausible. So I think City have pointed Viana because he will sign these potential gems. I don't think they're all going to work. We'll probably sign five players at 30 million. Vitor Reis is one of them already. So Savinho, I said it unintentionally, but he fits that profile. To be fair, Kusanov's another. And then maybe, we signed that Juma Bar fellow as well, the young centre back, and then someone like either Savona or Wesley. These 30 million punts, I think only maybe two or three of them will probably become successes, and you probably lose a bit there. But you could argue that that sort of pays for itself there. If one or two of them end up not making it, you wasted 40 million. But previously, we've wasted 50 million on Calvin Phillips, and I'm sure we'll still make some money on them. You might lose 10, 15 million on them, but that's better than signing four players for 60 million and not being sure if they're all going to make it. So I think City are sort of trying to get these young talents and turn them into 70, £80 million players because that's what it costs these days. We look at Cambiasso and City still might go for him, but there's rumours that Juventus were asking for 65 million in January to get it done. And with bonuses and add-ons, that's pushing £70 million. It's an absurd amount of money. And if you could look at someone else who's 25 million instead and after, they might not play 4,000 minutes in a season, but they might play half the games, and then season after that, they play regularly, and suddenly they are the players that are worth that amount of money. The downside to that, of course, is you need that quality immediately. It's a trade-off. I think you do sign some high-quality players and you sign some young ones at the same time, and I think we are linked to people like Florian Wirtz and Gibbs White who are more expensive, and there's been a link to Tijana Reinders as well this morning, actually. They're the ones of the higher quality, but signing people like Wesley who are a little bit cheaper, that allows you then to spend money on the bigger names because you presume Tijana Reinders from AC would cost 75 million, but then you can't do that again for a right back. So at that point, you'd rather spend the money in midfield. It's a Guardiola side. Look, Cambiasso and Tijana Reinders would be £140 million. It's a insane amount of money, whereas Wesley and Reinders would be £100 million, and it's not ideal. You want to be able to spend it all, but look, Livramento's another linked 70 million. I reckon Newcastle will probably ask for. It's stupid money. And look, we talk about output, but he's only got about 4 goals and assists all season, Livramento, and he's brilliant. And most people take him in a heartbeat. So I understand the logic behind it. Basically, we are going to see this kind of signing, and honestly, I quite like it. I'd love that I'd never heard of Kusanov and he became this fan favorite almost immediately because there's a story to that. And I love football because it's part of my life, and I've been watching City since the early '90s. As a nearly 40-year-old man, and I enjoy these narratives. And back then, when I was a kid, every footballer was a mystery to me. Every footballer was exotic because there wasn't the internet. I had a sticker book and that was it, and the newspaper every now and then, or Football Italia. There wasn't, there wasn't TV show showing the Georgian League when King Clancy showed up, so he was a mystery to me. And so these days, when City sign a player, he's a 21-year-old from Brazil or an 18-year-old in Vitor Reis. I know you could find out about if you want to, but you don't know who they are unless you spend all your time watching football. I don't, I've got too much on my life, so I quite like it. I do quite like it. There's a mystery to that. And it's fun for me as a football fan to watch these players become superstars and develop and improve at City. And I think it's fun for Guardiola to find the challenge as well. It does run the risk of being act like Brighton, play like Brighton. And there's no offense to Brighton, but Brighton aren't a Champions League winning side. That's the slight risk, but I think it might be a necessary evil in 2025 given the financial state of the football.
Yeah, it's been reported with Wesley that I think he's valued at around £30 million. So, that's less than half, I think, what Juventus want for someone like Andrea Cambiasso. And
Yeah.
I think Savona would probably be a similar value to Wesley as well. So you can understand why they're looking at these cheaper alternatives because they might have to spend more on your Florian Wirtzes, the Morgan Gibbs Whites, etc. So
Yeah.
it does make sense, I think, in that sense. And in terms of fullbacks, how much of a priority is it for City to sign one, if not two fullbacks this summer? Of course, Kyle Walker, I think it's been reported now that AC Milan are prepared to trigger that option to buy him. So there's a real need to sign a right back, and obviously they've been linked with potentially bolstering their options at left back as well. So how much of a priority is that, and who would be maybe the ideal fullback target for City in the summer?
Yeah, and I think we have to sign fullbacks. You look at our current options, Mateus Nunes and Rico Lewis operate at right back. O'Reilly, Vardiol, currently Nathan Ake, but I don't know about Nathan Ake's future. Like he's barely played football. I think he's one that unfortunately might be on the chopping board. It feels hard to say that because Nathan Ake is so intensely likable. But Guardiola talked an awful lot about, we can't have players who aren't available because he doesn't like a massive squad. It's going to be slightly bigger than last season, but they are sort of dead weight if you're taking up squad numbers and you're just not there for half the season. And that applies to John Stones and Nathan Ake, then unfortunately, like someone's got to give. And I don't know how you get rid of them because I don't know who's going to pay the money for them. I think there might be some compromises for City to move on a little bit, but I think I'm going to presume Nathan Ake is a good chance he goes. So that leaves Vardial, and that leaves Nico Riley. And if Ake and Stones go, well, then Vardial has to play at centre back almost certainly. And I think Guardiola really likes what he sees there, given his left foot and the way he opens up the game for City. He's technically brilliant, and he looks so much more comfortable there than he does on the left back. So I think you need a left back. We've seen City linked to Kirkaz. Cambiasso can play at the left, of course, as well. We know Nico Riley can, but we know he wants to play further up the pitch. I'd be amazed if City don't sign a left back and a right back. There might be prospect signings, young signings, where you know 25 million, 30 million, like Wesley or Savona. Or there could be £65 million Cambiasso who can play on either side for what it's worth, and it'd be a really smart signing. It could be we've been linked to Kirkez briefly. The rumours that he might have a release clause of around 45, 50 million. That would make a lot of sense. That would make a lot of sense to me. 21 years old on the left, can get forward, can offer traditional width. And then you've got Nico Riley if you want to play him there. He could do the inverted thing you want him to as a midfielder. On the right, you get someone like Wesley, a traditional attacking fullback with an electric pace. And then you could use Nico O'Reilly, Rico Lewis or Nunes as options there as well. So, yeah, I can see City signing a couple. I think it's necessary because Kyle Walker and Ake are likely to move on, I would say. And they're actually fullback options, and I think that means you lose Vardiol as well at left back. So I think we have to, really.